All right. So on this episode of We'll Name This Later, we've got Zach Tarbett from Edge Home Finance and myself, Jerome Hansen from Hansen Realty. And today we definitely wanted to, we're doing this impromptu. We're doing this a little bit sooner than we normally would, mainly because of the lawsuit settlement regarding the NAR, right? So this is something that is definitely, if you're in the industry, if you're in the real estate industry, or you've been, kind of looking around and trying to see what the market is like and trying to find out some things about the market, you may have seen this headline pop up in your feeds, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. So we are going to discuss that and kind of, number one, just break it down. And number two, we have, our opinions on what it is and where it's going to take us as far as real estate. So Zach, why don't you just kind of give us your kind of take on what you've read as far as the settlement in general? What are your bullet points and takeaways?
Yeah. So this came out, I believe, Friday. So we're about 72 business hours, not including the weekend, of actually filming this. And there's been a lot of information going on around, whether it's good or bad or accurate, I think is the bigger question. There's a lot of hysteria with this specific topic of how it's going to impact, not only buyers, but the agents that have made a career out of being buyers agents. And then how is it going to impact our military veterans, since there are very clear guidelines about realtor commissions and how they are paid out in the VA handbook. So I think it's a lot of hysteria from people, and we need to wait to see how this is going to play out in the coming weeks or even months of how it's really going to impact us. I think that there's just a lot of miscommunication and a lot of misinformation since it's still so new. But what I've seen is debunking that, no more 6% realtor commissions. Realtors are getting destroyed right now. There's a lot of headlines that I think are fear mongering. And, at the end of the day, we only know what we know, and it's not too much right now.
Okay. So number one, the very first thing I want to make sure that I clarify there is that the 6% commission talk, right? So there was no standard 6% commission on realtor pay, right? It was always negotiable, right? So, and you know that already, right? But I think what you're referring to is a lot of people in the industry believe that, and now they're going out saying that, hey, yeah, we got rid of 6% commissions. It was never 6% in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It was always a negotiable rate between the consumer and the real estate agent, right? Whether that's listing agent or buyer's agent, right? It was always negotiable. So I want to run down a couple of the bullet points, some of the major bullet points from the settlement, right? So, well, actually, why don't we just break down a little bit about what the lawsuit was in the first place, right? So the lawsuit was sellers. It is a class action lawsuit. It was over 500,000 sellers, right? Got together with some lawyers and they filed a class action lawsuit naming NAR as one, and then some of the really big brokerages. I believe Keller Williams was one of them. There were some others, right? But the reason that the lawsuit was filed is because that those sellers and the lawyers believe that there was basically a fixing scam as far as the commissions were concerned, right? Mm-hmm. They believe that the NAR and a lot of the bigger brokerages and agents were trying to fix how much the commissions were. And just like I just talked about, right, they have always been negotiable. So, and that was by law, right? It was negotiable by law. So if there was a perceived set standard, that's kind of where this is coming from, right? Because the sellers are basically saying, well, we didn't know that we had a choice. We didn't know that it was negotiable and stuff like that. So that comes from the fault of agents who weren't properly explaining what the hell they were doing, right? This comes from sellers not understanding and not having enough information, right? So there's definitely blame to go around, right? And that's what the lawsuit, I mean, the crux of it was really about, right?
Yep.
So as a result, we have this settlement now, this proposed settlement. And the proposed settlement is not fully complete yet. It's supposed to be looked over by the courts. So it's still pending approval by our court system. And if it is, then it would take effect mid-July of this
Mid-July.
year.
Okay, of
Yep.
the 2020.
Yep.
Okay.
This year. So here are, I guess, three main things about the settlement, right? Number one, the NAR has agreed to pay the prosecutorial side $418 million, right? That's number one. Number two, cooperative commissions, right, are no longer going to be allowed to be placed on the MLS platform.
Okay.
So there's not going to be a button for me as a realtor to click anymore and write in how much the seller and me as a, let's say, a listing agent agreed to pay to the buyer's agent, right? So it's not blanket anymore because it's not in the MLS. It's
Right.
not going to be there starting in July. The third thing that they did is they decided to make sure that a buyer's agent and a buyer must have a written agreement before even showing a house at all, right? Now, we can get into each one of those three things, right? But I just wanted to clarify what really the settlement was about, what the lawsuit was about. Obviously, I'm doing broad strokes here, so there's definitely more minutia, right? But those three bullet points are, to me, those are the main three bullet points of the settlement.
Right.
So
first
how
one.
about we take, how about we take number one, right?
Yeah. So
418 million. What do you think about that, right?
I think it's quite the chunk of change, right? 418 million isn't a drop in a bucket. It is quite a bit of money. But my first, thought is, well, where's all that money going if there's 500,000, sellers who are being represented by these attorneys, right? They may get some chunk of change. Maybe it covers that 3% that they feel like they were, wrongfully swindled into. I don't know. I don't think we know what the payout, right? We know that the attorneys, I think the list I saw, like one of the top attorneys is getting over what, 10 or 20 million or something like that. It's quite a bit.
I hadn't read that, but that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So quite a bit, great payday for that attorney, right? Let's give credit where credit is due. But then how does that really help these sellers that felt that they were misled or misconstrued in whatever way? That's something, of course, TBD, right? We're in 72 business hours of this developing, so we don't know how people are going to get paid out, what exactly they're going to be paid. It's very interesting in that aspect. But this, that dollar sign has, I think, really shaken up a lot of people in the real estate industry because that could put companies out of business, bankrupt, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, man. So, I'm glad you touched on the lawyers because in this entire thing, my personal belief is that the lawyers are the winners here, right? Even though there were 500,000, sellers that signed on to this class action lawsuit because they felt like, hey, we were harmed. We want some, financial restitution. We want some kind of, judgment to get our money back. We feel wronged. It's the lawyers that are making out, right? And I didn't know this up until a little while ago, but in a class action lawsuit, Did you realize that it is standard for the lawyer's team to take approximately a quarter of any settlement that happens in a class action lawsuit, right?
A
So
quarter.
we said what, 418 million,
So
right?
just over $100 million
The
from
law
that.
team, right? The law team is getting a quarter of it, 100 million, right? If there are over 500,000 sellers that felt wronged and they signed on to this, they are now splitting, I don't know, 300 mil, right?
Yeah,
They're probably I don't know, they're probably getting like $500. So like, what do you got? 600,
$600.
right? Right. And we don't even know the real details, right? We don't even know the true details. I don't know. There could be all kinds of other costs and all that sort of stuff, but more than likely, I don't know, they're getting hundreds of dollars. Let's
Right.
say that. They're getting hundreds of dollars. The lawyers are going to be walking away. I don't know how many lawyers are in a team, but they're getting a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're getting a lot of money. So to me, big winner, lawyers,
Yeah.
right? Secondary winners, sellers, right? But they're not getting financial gain. They're just getting, I don't know, like a modicum of like, they're getting a handshake to say, hey, thank you for putting this in. And now we've changed some regulations because of you, right?
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
They're getting an attaboy.
Yeah. So now let's talk about like, are they really winning, right? So how about the second one? I think the second one I mentioned was that compensation is no longer going to be put on the MLS,
Mhm.
right? Um, I know this isn't really your wheelhouse, but do you have any thoughts on that? Because I mean, you as a lender, you don't really have to worry about the MLS that much.
Mhm.
But do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's very interesting, right? I've seen some personalities in this industry and not knowing, or let me rephrase that. I've seen it where commission has been listed on the MLS for 2%. And I have physically sat in an open house with an agent, and that was the split. It was 2% to the buyer agent, 2% to the listing agent, because the seller didn't have a lot of equity. And this agent
Right.
specifically said that they were not going to show their clients this house because it wasn't worth the commission check. And this leads us back to the whole reason why these lawsuits are a big deal is because
Yep.
it's not in the best interest of the clients. What I think is that it could deter some of these agents that maybe, quite frankly, shouldn't be in the business. They're only concerned about a commission check, very transactional, nothing to do with building a relationship and actually caring for their clients. I think it's going to shake a lot of those people out. And I also think what you're going to have to see is, depending where you're at, those agents are going to have to negotiate for their commission. You are just not walking into a house guaranteed 3%, which kind of was the rule of thumb, even though it wasn't. And I think it's going to put a lot of buyers agents that don't have real skin in the game that treat this as a side hustle, a part-time gig. It's going to push a lot of those people out, I think, because it's really going to have to make people step up to show, why are you worth 2 or 3% as a agent, right? We really have to show our worth. We get it all the time on the broker side, right? What can you do for me? How's your rate? What's all this? And it all goes back to what we make at the end. And I think we're seeing that kind of trickle into the real estate agent side of things.
Yeah. So that is definitely a good perspective that you just threw out there. And I can definitely vibe with that. That I 100% agree that there are going to be quite a few agents that leave the business due to this. We were already starting a decline, right?
Yep.
Just because of interest rates and stuff like that. Homes just are not moving as fast. We're not in the height of the market tempo right now. So that's what happens with real estate agents. I think this will accelerate that. And yes, you will see more agents leave the business. What you're referring to, I think, is a good point, is the professionalism of the business. I think that you will see more professional realtors step up, stay in the game, and continue to show their value. regardless of what, regardless of whether you can post it in the MLS about the commission structure or not, right? You'll see the more professional realtors hang in there and be just fine because they're good at articulating their overall value. The other side of this, though, is what a part of what this whole lawsuit was doing was trying to make sure that everything was transparent, right? The problem I have with it is that you've actually just removed a huge layer of transparency, right? If you are not showing what the listing agent and the seller agreed upon as the commission, right? If you're not showing that, transparency, in my opinion, is gone, right? Because each individual offer and buyer agent that comes in now, there's going to be a fluctuation on the buyer's side agent payment, right?
Right.
You get to exactly the listing agent and the seller now get to change their minds depending on each buyer agent that sets in an offer. And I'll set up an example, right? Used to be, since the listing agent and the seller would set what they were willing to pay a buyer's agent, and it would be transparently in the MLS, right? Every offer that comes in, that portion of the offer is the same, right? Because it's set by the listing side.
Right.
Now you get to play around with it a lot, right?
Right.
There really isn't a whole lot of transparency. And I'm going to throw this out there, right? I have to throw it out there because this is part of the reason the MLS made it this way a long time ago to begin with. All right. I'm gonna catch flack for it, but it's the truth, right? I'm gonna catch flack for it. What happens if there's a listing agent, right, who gets an offer from a white, black, and Hispanic, 3 sets of offers, white, black, Hispanic buyer's agents, right? That listing agent and their seller can now do what? They can set different priorities for each one of them, right? No one's thinking about that, right? But that layer of transparency that was there before is no longer going to be there. And there's no way that you're going to be able to prove that there is now a difference between these three, that the way these 3 people are being treated. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I'm trying to tie it into like my side of the rules and regulations because we have a little bit different there. But it sounds like between, it eliminates that level playing field to where, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, where it could allow a seller / listing agent to, whether they do it directly or indirectly, discriminate based on the offer that they're getting.
Yes.
Because it could have a play into the commission, it could play into anything, but it could just have a factor that could, like I said, whether intentionally or unintentionally, cause a bias in the offer that these sellers accept, if I'm understanding.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm getting at, right? You got to think about the reason why the transparency was there in the first place, right? And I mean, it's not just about ethnicity either. Women had a horrible shake in this business as well, right? So all of a sudden, we take that layer of transparency away, right? You don't know what the listing side was doing with all the other agents, buyer side agents. You come along, all of a sudden you see a very either zero or low offer of compensation,
Mhm.
right? But you don't know. You don't know if you're being discriminated against or if this person is just, you know what, they're not going to do it. You know what I mean?
I see what
That's the
you're saying.
difference, right?
Oh,
That is the difference. Whereas in the MLS, it was just there. All the buyer agents, regardless who they were, what ethnicity, what gender, right? What company they were from,
mhm.
right? And that's also a thing, right? What if they want to discriminate based on the company that you're from, right?
Right.
All of this, there's so many more layers to this that people haven't really thought about, right?
Mhm.
It's just that you need to think about it, right? You've just removed that layer starting July. You've
Mhm.
removed that layer, and now you've given carte blanche to the listing side,
Mhm.
which is the way it used to be way back in the day. Way back in the day, the listing side got to do whatever the hell they wanted to do, right? That's how the MLS came to be so transparent. That's what happened,
Right.
right? That's why buyer's agent came into being, is to represent um, consumers who were looking to purchase a home, right?
Right.
It used to be that the listing agents did all that kind of stuff, and people were like, "Well, where's the buyer side representation?"
Mhm.
You know, like that's how we came into being,
Right.
right? So I think we're going down a path of forgetting why both sides to agency exist in the first place.
And I feel like with, the whole commission thing, depending how the offer is submitted, right? It seems like, if I'm understanding this, the listing agent already has their commission set in stone with that seller before it's going on the market now.
They will, yes, they
And
will.
it's up to them if they offer any kind of anything to the buyers, or is it up to the buyer's agent to negotiate 100% now?
It is going to be up to the seller to figure out whether they want to offer anything, right? But here's the thing: if you're a listing agent, right, and I feel the same way. You know, when I'm a listing agent, starting July, if I have a seller, um, and this, the question, we get to that point where we're like, okay, should we offer anything to the buyer side agent?
Mhm.
Why would I recommend them immediately just to offer something up to the buyer side agent, right? Why would I do that? Why would I say, yeah, you should definitely do that? It's not going to be published in the MLS anyway. It's
Right.
it's there's no thing for it, right? So the best thing to do is just say, well, we'll see what kind of offers we get,
Mhm.
right? So there would be zero at first, and then you would wait to see what kind of offers you get, right? And
Right.
what's going to end up happening is, let's say you get three offers, one's going to have um, a great offer, but it's going to be contingent on the fact that my buyer side agent gets some sort of compensation,
Right.
and then you'll have, I don't know, two of them where there'll be great offers with no requirement to pay a buyer side compensation, right?
Mhm.
Which are you going to go with as a seller?
Yeah.
And as a
Well,
listing agent, which do I have to tell them makes more sense? It's the one with no buyer's buyer's
right.
agent commission. That's
Right.
simple, right? So I'm gonna have to go after having my seller make more money.
Mhm.
Plain and simple. I will have to do that, right?
Because
Because that's
that's in
part
your
of my job.
fiduciary duty. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of my job, right? So you're definitely placing, in my opinion, a large burden on the buyer side
Mhm.
because of the way that this will play out through the months and years. Because it's my fiduciary duty to tell my sellers, yeah, why would you want to offer it? Let's just see what kind of offers we get.
Mhm.
Which, right? What It's just going to play out that more and more listing agents will advise that you don't put anything in there.
Right.
You just put the offer put the property on the market,
And see
right?
what happens.
Yeah. So now the with time, buyers are going to have to pick up the slack somehow, right? They're either going to have to ask for concessions from the seller, or they're going to have to work it into negotiations to say, here is, I want to buy the house, but I need you to figure out a way to pay my buyer's agent.
Right.
And that is going to look worse than someone who doesn't have to write that in. That's
Right.
pretty simple, right?
Yeah, that's pretty easy right there to understand, because it's, just everything you said, right? With knowing that it's stripping that buyer or putting them in a worse position, right? Because, whether it's 1% or 3%, that is an additional cost for any
Yes.
buyer out there. Not going into loan programs with that or anything right now, but that is an additional cost that a lot of people are just not going to be able to do.
And I mean, you deal in their finances. I mean, when you're really checking out a buyer and you're looking at, okay, you need earnest money. I need you to put down this down payment. I need you to make sure that you have your credit score perfect. I need to see your debt to income ratio. I need to make sure that you'll be able to pay regular closing costs, right? There are a ton of costs already on the buyer, right?
Yes.
Now we're making sure that pretty much 90% of the time they're going to have to figure out a way to pay for their buyer's agent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that not extra cost for the buyer?
Speaking, as you said, right, I am in the nitty gritty of people's finances as a mortgage broker. And to expect your average, let's just go with the first time home buyer, right? Just somebody who's stepping up to be able to have an additional 2 to 3% when with your down payment, right? Let's go with 3% conventional, plus your earnest money, plus your appraisal, plus your inspection. All that stuff right there, that's typically about 4 to 5%. So if you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 3% additional, buyers are going to have 8 to 10% cash on hand of that purchase price, which in our current market, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say it's about 470 medium home price, something like that.
Yeah, about 460ish, depending
you
on.
know, and 10% of 470 is $47,000, and that is just to get into a home. So
Yep.
think about that before, right? Typically 3% plus another maybe 2 to 3 with closing costs, let's say 6%. That's fine. That's what some people can swing. But then now we want to throw them almost double the fees to get into a home. Because to get into a house here with 3% down with your closing costs and everything is maybe about 20 to 25, just depending on, the program, the buyer's profile. But then to say, hey, you need to have 25 to 22,000 more of that. I mean, that's going to put the goal and dream of home ownership just this much further up there when everyone's trying to just get in right here.
Yeah. And it is really ironic to me, it's really ironic to me that we decided to go this route, short term. I don't expect things to drastically change short term, but you know me, I'm not a short term type of dude, right? I'm a guy that likes to think long term and figure out what are going to be the cascading effects of something, right? So even the things that I talked about, as far as discrimination wise and all that kind of stuff, I don't expect to see a huge, increase in discrimination and stuff like that immediately, right? I expect to see that slower, right? I think it will happen, right?
Mhm.
Anybody that believes that there's no discrimination in our industry right now, you got another thing coming, right? Removing that extra layer of transparency in my mind just makes it just a little bit easier now, right? The effects that we're talking about of the cost of home ownership moving up, that will not be overnight, right? It's not even going to be in the first few months. It's gonna be a while, right? It's gonna take a while for those effects to really hit. And even though we're talking about, affordability and it hitting the buyer, if affordability goes down in the long term, that also affects the sellers. So they really kind of just screwed themselves, right? So they did this whole class action lawsuit. Affordability will probably go down. What do you think? How are you going to be selling your properties for maximum prices if no one's going to be able to afford your properties,
Right.
right? Long term, you're hurting yourself. That's the way I look at it.
And this is where I will play devil's advocate. This is where I don't really think change will be there, right? Because people are talking about affordability, this, that, and the other. If your house, if let's say, right, you're not paying any buyer's agent's commission, it's up to them to figure it out. When your house is on the market for 100 days, 120 days, which in our market, even with great representation, has been a thing. We have seen houses
Yep.
in the market for
Definitely.
60, 80, 90, 100 days. I think that is where I would say the market is going to correct itself because people are going to jump on the bandwagon. They're going to say, you know what, we're not paying anything. And especially, a heavy military town like we are in, where most of our home buyers are, quite frankly, VA. I would say a huge chunk of our home buyers here are VA. If no one is able to afford the house or whatever, it's going to sit there. And that's when I think this really is going to fall down to the knowledge, education, and guidance of that listing agent to explain to them, what, if you want to sell your house in a timely fashion, this is negotiable, but this is what has worked in the past. And that because you kind of spirals into the VA thing, veterans cannot pay their agents commission. They cannot give them a dime out of pocket. I know we have talked about some gray areas that people have been addressing or whatever. And
Yeah.
all I'm going to say about those gray areas is I feel like it's an ethics issue and it's a moral issue if you're trying to charge a veteran somehow outside of closing.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is where I think it's big news now. And I think it's quickly going to blow over because it's so hot right now. But I think it's going to make people really have to step up and educate that seller. Like, you can do this, but let's look at the average American. Let's look at their household. Let's look at what they're doing. And to expect them to bring an additional, let's just go on the high end, 3% to pay their agent's commission. I don't see it.
I definitely feel you on that. And I somewhat agree. Yeah. I definitely feel you on that. The thing is, man, we don't know, we don't know how this all gonna shake out. I believe there are some different models of brokerages that are gonna be thrown about here. Because of what's happening with the MLS, I believe that some different firms and companies are probably going to step in and try to fill a hole in the MLS that they see, and they're going to try to, they're going to try to take some of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out, right? Why don't we go to that third thing that I talked about, right? So the third portion in my mind, the bullet point in this settlement that takes a hold is the requirement now. Now it's finally a mandate that the buyer's agent and the buyer sign written contracts before even showing a property. Right here in Colorado, it's called the exclusive right to buy listing contract. Right, exclusive right to buy. Okay, let's just keep it at that. That way, people don't get confused. But that's what it's called. And it's been something that should have always been done. It just wasn't mandated to the extent that it is now. Now it's mandated that, hey, before you even go show, well, as of July anyway, it's going to be mandated that before you even show a buyer a property, you need to have them sign this full-on agreement, which includes compensation agreement, right?
Mhm.
So that entire conversation, if realtors hadn't been doing it before, which they should have, right? it will be happening now. So immediately every buyer is going to have in their head, do I have a way to compensate this guy?
Right.
Right. Um, what if I get a house, or if I want a house that the listing side doesn't want to pay my agent? Do I actually have enough money to cover it? Right. So that's something that they will have to immediately start thinking about. And that's, in my opinion, that's part of the transparency that should have always been there. I
Mhm.
like that part of the transparency. I
Right.
love that. I haven't always been doing it before any showings, but it's definitely part of my consultation before I take them out. They already know all that kind of stuff, right? And I usually, but before this, I would normally explain it to them. They get to see what compensation would look like,
Hmm.
and then maybe, because I wanted them to see how I work through showings, and how we communicate and talk to them and all that kind of jazz. I would probably give them 1 to 2 showings out with me before I'm like, okay, sorry guys, you need to sign this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Now it's like, hey, are we on the same page here? Cool. I just explained this all to you. Sign, because you're not gonna get to see a house before this is signed, right?
Hmm. So do you think that's going to put more pressure on buyers to quickly pick an agent they may not be comfortable with, or turn to that listing agent and remove all that power and negotiating that the buyer's agent is in place for?
Yeah. So I think both of those things will happen. I believe that a lot of salesman-y type agents
Hmm.
will get people to sign stuff really fast,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
that's what will happen, and they may not vibe too well with them. They might not be good at communication. They may not be great agents, but they're really good at convincing people to sign stuff, right?
Right.
So that, yeah, that could happen, right? The other thing could also happen, where what you're describing is the consumer, instead of deciding to deal with a buyer's agent and having to think about, even just thinking about paying the buyer's agent out of their own pocket, they decide, okay, I'll just go directly to the listing agent,
Hmm.
right? That's the person who's got the property. I'll go directly to them. What they don't realize is that listing agent, no matter what they say, their first obligation is to the seller, right?
Right.
They represent the seller. They are the fiduciary of the seller, right? When a consumer goes, when a home buyer goes to the listing agent, they are not going to be afforded all of the representation and all of the same legal protection as if they had their own buyer agent representative, right?
Right.
So it's basically going unrepresented, right? That's basically what that is.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that will end up happening as well. There's a portion of buyers that will do that.
Hmm.
There's a portion of buyers that will sign on too quickly with certain agents that they probably don't mesh too well with. So we're going to have some issues, in my
Right.
opinion. And of course, there's also going to be a percentage of them that do fine. They do their research, they interview multiple agents, they figure out which one they want to sign on with, and then move forward, right? So there will be a percentage of each, but I think that the probability that we have more unrepresented buyers goes up. Yes, I do
Yeah.
believe that.
The sad truth of what could potentially happen, because let's face it, right? You said some people are going to do their due diligence, do their research, and then some people are blindly going to just want to see a home, right? I think it goes back to there's a lot of not misinformation, but not a lot of information about how the process works when it comes to buying a home.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, hey, I need to go talk to this person, listing agent, Jane Doe. You don't know any better because you think that's now how you have to get in the house, which is very, could be a big thing.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, the biggest issue with that is buyer no longer has proper, representation because
Yeah.
that listing agent, it is their duty to do in the best interest of that seller.
Yeah. And there's no one on there. There's no one on the buyer's side in that situation, right? Like, what's the listing agent gonna do? Like, argue with himself? Like, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
like, there's no real representation there, right? So yeah, it's I believe that the proportion of those types of buyers will increase, and it will increase more problems. But like I said, it's not going to be immediate, right? We're gonna keep going along with this, and we're all gonna think everything's fine until maybe 2 years down when we start receiving statistics of how many buyers are dissatisfied or how many buyers gave up on home ownership, or you know what I mean? Once the
Right.
stats start actually flowing in, that's when we're gonna be like, oh, I guess buyers are having a harder time of it, you know?
Right.
That's what's gonna happen, in my opinion, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the beauty of this being so new. We don't know until more time
Yeah.
has passed and we really see how this plays out.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I mean, as an independent broker, I'm already trying to like game plan what my processes are gonna be after July, right? Um, there is a certain as when I meet prospective buyers, there's a certain process that I feel like I have right now that may not be as competitive once July hits, right? So I may have to tweak a few things, right? At the end of the day, I'm still running a business,
Hmm.
okay? So one of the things that I've thought about is, and I've said it to you before, there are quite a few of us agents out there who do a ton of stuff for free, right?
Hmm.
Um, we are giving advice, we're picking up phone calls, right? We're constantly going to meet people and consult with them and all that kind of jazz for free, right? Now that a lot of the compensation that we would have banked on to kind of make up for a lot of that free work, a
Hmm.
lot of that's going to decrease. So I have to make it up somewhere, right?
Right.
And although I love my buyers, that's going to come from the time that I'm spending with them.
Hmm.
I'm going to have to figure out, either I cut the amount of time that I spend with them, right? Or I charge them for it.
Mm.
That's what's going to happen. And you have to think about this on a mass scale. I cannot be the only agent that's thinking like that.
Right.
There are a ton of us that are going to have to think about, it's time is money, right? We have been willing to throw that out because we knew that at some point we would get to, an end state where it's like, okay, got this compensation, seller side's paying for it, my buyer is good, you know, it now it's a little bit different. The calculus changes just a little bit en masse,
Right.
right? So you have to factor that in if you're running a business. You
Hmm.
have to factor that in.
Right. Right. Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's gonna be as, smooth as everybody thinks. Once the months and years start going by, you're gonna see a lot of agents charging per hour. You're gonna see a lot of agents that might charge per showing, right?
Hmm.
You might see a lot of agents change to charge a flat fee, right? Because that's one of the ways that they can know, okay, well, I'm going to be guaranteed that from the buyer. If I just do a flat fee, they know about it. whether or not I close, boom, flat fee, right?
Right.
That is one of the ways that they're going to try to make up for it. Agents will do what they need to do to survive, right? And if it's hourly, okay, right? Yeah, so you're going to have to pick your poison as a consumer,
Mhm.
but it's still an added cost, right?
Right. Right.
Still an
Either
added
way,
cost.
how we
Yeah,
look at that, it's still more fees to the buyers that may or may not, depending on their situation, have the funds to cover them.
yeah.
Because the big pitch that I have heard, right? I bought a few homes, I know you have as well, is if you use a
Hmm.
buyer's agent, you don't have to pay their commission. So why wouldn't you? Now that has changed a little bit, right? Depending how
Just
this
a touch.
shakes out.
Just
But
a touch.
tentatively, that has changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there will still be a percentage of sellers that do exactly as you said. They will offer up compensation,
Mhm.
right? There's still going to be a percentage. Um, I think it'll just take a little while before a lot of them start just not offering up a percentage,
Right.
you know.
Right. I think
So
I think we're going to see some things shake out, and it's hard to tell which way it's going to go because there's so many different directions that this settlement is bringing on. But I think you know we can only adapt, we can only adjust to it, and we can only modify our business models around these changes. So
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
of course, for you have a little bit of time to figure it out, but it's still there's not a clear path yet, and hopefully, before the summer hits, we can see a little bit better. And that's just where
exactly.
time is really, really going to play a factor into this. But I think with all the panic and everything, we all just need to take a step back and realize, hey, the big thing I keep seeing is I don't have a job anymore. I'm not going to have a job. Um, if mortgage brokers survived the 2008 crash and the absolute ass spanking we got rules and regulations
Yeah,
after '08,
y'all took it bad on that one.
oh
Yeah,
yes, yes. I think realtors will be just fine,
yeah,
and this machine is not going to stop. It's going to shake out those people that aren't taking it seriously, like we said. We're just going to keep moving forward. And the only thing that we can do, because we are business professionals, right? We run our business, whether you're a business owner or, an entrepreneur, as we call it. I work for a big company. We're just going to have to adapt. That's all you can do.
yeah. I definitely don't disagree with that. That is 100% the case. So yeah, we will survive. It'll be fine, right? I still stick to my guns in saying that this entire thing just put a larger burden on the buyers, though.
Right.
And you also laid out that due to current VA loan rules, our VA buyers are also in a little bit of a spot. And I'll lay that out for people that don't really understand, right? It's once again coming to the choice of the seller, right? If you've got three, if you've got three offers on the table, and one of them literally has to have buyer agent compensation from the seller in there, you're going to choose the ones that don't need that.
Hmm.
So you're putting the VA loan purchaser at a disadvantage, right? Unless the VA pamphlet changes a little bit, you know, that that's what's happening.
Right.
You are putting them at a slight disadvantage. Um, so yeah, I definitely wholeheartedly stand by that. And I think that's what we'll see shake out a little bit. And our case here in Colorado Springs, it may not affect us as quickly or as much. So
Hmm.
you're correct on that because we're a military town. Everybody kind of knows the deal. If you're
Yeah.
not friendly to veterans, it's probably not going to happen. You need to fix yourself, right? That's kind of just how it is. But we're in the minority as far as the US landscape, right?
Hmm.
um, we got to think on a broader scale how that affects our VA purchasers that are not in military towns.
Drastic.
What's happening there, right?
Yeah. It could, where I see it really, really hurting veterans is like the small areas where it's just not a lot of VA stuff going in and out. Maybe like your I don't want to say Midwest towns because those may have a lot of VA, but just a small area where it's just mostly FHA and conventional loans. I think that you're absolutely right. It's going to push that veteran buyer their offer to the bottom of the pile because they need that compensation covered as of right now. According to the VA, still as of March 19th, 2024, veterans cannot pay their agent's commission. It is not allowed. It's one of the non-allowable fees. And I keep getting this question a lot. Is it going to change? I don't work for the VA.
So.
Anything with the government takes time. And
Yep.
this has been a huge topic in any VA communities with real estate professionals. And the matter of fact is, we don't know. They may change it, they may not. Anything to come to do with the VA about charging a veteran more, you have to really explain to them why they should pay more money.
Yeah.
So lenders are capped at a 1% origination fee, no ifs, ands, or buts. And lenders have been trying to argue it because it's not a lot of money that they make when they only do that. But the VA always says, how is it better for the veteran for them to pay more of an origination fee? And I think this is the rock in the hard place we're going to see with the VA until time will tell, there's enough ripples to where it's like, this needs to change because we've seen a huge decrease in VA buyers in the market across the country. That's where I think it could change. But it's just so hard to tell.
Yeah. I mean, and we had already dealt with this. People had this stigma around the whole VA appraisal process, right? There's literally people still to this day who believe they shouldn't be selling to a VA purchaser because of the whole appraisal thing. You know what I mean? They thought that was a bad thing, and that stigma is still around today. I definitely get it, so I think with this now rolling in, I think it'll be even more so, you know.
And then where do you think a lot of these stigmas come from when it comes to VA sellers?
You get me. You got me there. I don't know. I don't know where it comes from.
I think a lot of it boils down to bad information from real estate professionals harping in these people's ear.
From the agents, you mean?
The real estate professionals. I'm not looping anybody. It could be a number of people, right? I've dealt with lenders who don't know anything about VA and couldn't punch their way out of a wet paper bag because they don't know anything about it. But I think a lot of that all of it boils down to, right? The sales 6% was always negotiable. Nobody was telling people that. VA loans are terrible because of the appraisal. Who's telling them that? Probably somebody who's whispering in there, who's in the business, who had one bad experience here, 25 years ago, whatever. So I think what this whole settlement and everything boils down to is, are professionals in the real estate industry going to step up and actually give proper information, guidance, and education to everyone involved in the transaction? That's from lenders to title reps to buyer's agents, listing agents. Everything right now is really focusing on, I think, the ethics and the process that the real estate industry has gotten accustomed to got shooken up because of that lack of information, ethics, the way you present your information. And I think that's where the real change hopefully comes, is like it shakes out those bad industry professionals and the people that actually take it seriously step up to guide us through this path, because we don't know what's going to happen other than all we can do is continue to do what we do, bring value, educate, and help.
I like it. And I'm glad that you and I consistently get on there and try to provide more information at the very least, right? And I think that's something that, especially for agents who love their buyers, right? I believe that going on social media and doing videos and doing blogs, pushing out more content, I think that is a part of the interview process now, right? Because we're going to have to, now you are mandated to sign before showing any properties. Give the consumer as much content and information about you as possible beforehand, right? That way they start to be a little bit more comfortable, so that when you sit down with them in the consultation, it's a little bit more relaxed. They know what information you've been putting out. They understand what your process is, who you are as a person, at least a little bit better, right? So this type of thing, in my opinion, is very useful. So I'm glad that I'm able to get on with you every now and then, especially when something just drops out of nowhere and kind of shakes the real estate industry. We
Right.
can hop on, we can have a good conversation. We didn't agree on all points, which we don't need to, right? But nobody knows where this is going to go. I'm glad that I got somebody like you to bounce questions off of and bounce ideas off of. So this has definitely been helpful for me, and I'm hoping that any of our viewers find it helpful as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so I believe we can end it there, man. We'll name this
Absolutely.
later.